very lengthy daf today. So let's get started. Today's daf, and just stop me if suddenly I lose connection or something. But today's daf Yud Bet in Masechet Gittin, and we actually got up to the two dots in Yud Bet Amud Aleph, so we're a little bit ahead of the game. But remember, the Mishnah basically had two cases that we were contrasting, and the cases were there was one case you gave a get or a document of freedom to a shliach to accept on behalf of either a woman, so a get isha, or on behalf of a slave, what's called a get shichror, right? And then you gave it to a shliach and said to the shliach, please take this get and hand it off to my wife or hand it off to my eved. And you change your mind before the shliach delivers it. So the question in the Mishnah was, are you allowed to change your mind? Or do we say that since it's a positive for that person, it's a schut for the person to be free or to be divorced, then therefore automatically the second the shliach gets it, it's a benefit. So the Tanakam in the Mishnah, which was the Chachamim, said that in fact it's only a schut for the eved to be free, and so the eved is free, right? The Rabbi Meir, I take it back. I got it backwards. Rabbi Meir, the Tanakama, said no. You can change your mind until it's been given to the eved or to the messenger of the eved or the woman. The Chachamim say it depends. By women, by Gittin Nashim, it's not considered to be a schut for the woman to be divorced. So therefore, at the time you give the shtar, it does not effectuate the get, and you can always go back on it until it's been handed over. But by slaves, it's a benefit. There's no downside to being free from being a slave, and therefore, since it's a benefit, it automatically happens. And Rabbi Meir countered in the Mishnah, what are you talking about? The Chachamim said, right, because even though once you free your eved, you're not going to feed them, you could have also said to the eved, even when they were working for you, work for me and I'm not going to feed you, which is the words that are going to be very important today. Asei imi ve'eni zancha. Work for me. You got to work, show up in the job, but I'm not providing you food. You got to get your own food somehow. So if you can say that to the eved, so you're not giving him anything anyway. So freeing him doesn't deprive him of food. You could have deprived him of food even when you owned him, and therefore there's no negative to freeing him, and therefore say the Chachamim, the shliach is mikabel for him immediately, as opposed to a wife where you can't say that. Okay, so let's go to today's Gemara now, which is the two dots on Yud Bet Amud Aleph. We'll go to today's daf. Says Gemara, Shmamina, what you see from this is what I just told you, which is Yachol Harav Lomar LaEved. An owner can say to his servant, this is an Eved Kanani, just for the record, can say to his Eved, Asei imi ve'eni zancha, work for me and I'm not going to support you. So therefore, I don't necessarily, now he might support him, he doesn't have to. And therefore, by freeing him, he's not depriving him of a guaranteed support. So that seems to be the proof from our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, not necessarily, because perhaps an owner has to feed his slave, except he can make a condition. If you're talking about a case to Amarle where the owner said to the slave, say maseh yadayach lemizonotayich, right? Mizonotecha, right? Where he said to him, you have a job, you work in construction, every day you get paid, use that money to buy your food, and what's extra give to me or something. But basically, it doesn't prove that the owner is free of feeding him. It's just possible that when the eved has a job, the owner can say, use your own money. So, well, if that's the case, what's the corresponding case by a wife? The kavate gavi isha, damerla, or a husband can say to his wife, right? Case we've had many times. If a wife has a job and is income potential, the husband doesn't have to feed her. He can say, and it's up to her really, but he can say to her, take the money that you're earning, or she can say to him, I want to do it this way. I want to keep my salary and I want to pay for my food that way. So then if that's the case, Isha Milo, right? So then why would a husband be considered to be necessary for a wife? He should be able to divorce her. She's getting nothing out of it because she's using her own money. She's going to keep using her own money once she's divorced. So what's the benefit of marriage in that case? Financial benefit. Says the Gemara, well, but the lo sapka. It's saying where she doesn't make enough money, right? She earns money, but it's not enough to provide for all her needs. So the husband has to supplement it. So by getting divorced, she would lose that access. Well, if that's the case, again, what about the Eved? Eved Nami, but Safik, if the Eved doesn't have enough money, then how in the world can that help? Avda, right, din Naham, this is a sort of a pitgam that we said, right? A slave, sorry, I'm just finding the words here. Yeah, Avda din Naham Krese lo shavye, right? a slave who's sorry. What are you going to say? The slave is talking about where the slave doesn't earn enough money to pay for his mizonot. Says there's a saying that a slave avda dinahom kreise lo shaving, a slave who can't even earn enough to fill his belly. I mean, he can't earn enough money by working to provide for his daily food. The mareu the marte the mitbai. What is his owner, his master, and his mistress? What do they want from him? Meaning, what value is he as a slave? And so there would be no point, basically, in having a slave who can't earn enough money to even sustain themselves. So basically, a drain on you, right? And therefore, essentially, you can't say that a slave is someone who can't earn enough money. But by a wife, that's really not the case, right? It might be that she can't earn enough money to provide for herself, and therefore she has benefits that a slave does not necessarily have. Tashma. Well, let's try to prove this from the next Braita. We are trying to help everyone find the place. We are around 15 lines down, I'd say, on Daf Yud Bet Amud Aleph. Tashma, last two words on the line. Eved shegalala arei miklat. Very interesting case. Today we're going to talk about slaves, not Gittin. But an Eved is exiled to an Ir Miklat, right? So you have a slave. Your slave accidentally kills another person, and they were going to be killed unless they run away to this Ir Miklat. Now, of course, the problem is that you hired the slave to build your house, but he's stuck in a different city, right? So he's pretty useless to you at this point. Says the Braita, Ein Rabo Chayav Lizono. His owner does not need to feed him anymore because he's living in a different city. Well, we'll see why. The low owed, Ella Shemase Yadav the Rabo. However, not only is the owner not responsible for feeding him, but if he works in that Ir Miklat, he gets a job as a whatever, then his money goes to his owner. He doesn't even keep it. So what do you see from here? Shemamina, you see from here, Yachol Harav Lomar LaEved, an owner can say to his slave, Aseimi, work for me and I'm going to keep your money, but I'm not going to feed you. Because that's what's happening, right? He's not feeding him, he's keeping all his money. And Gemara, not necessarily. This is a very interesting case. Because Achamay Yaskinan, he might be where he said to him, say Masay Yadecha Lemzonatecha. You've got to live, unfortunately, for the next 30 years in Ir Miklat. Earn your own money, buy your own food. I'm not supporting you anymore. So what does it mean that the money goes to the owner, right? Maybe it means lahadafa. It means the extra, right? The slave works. He takes his money to buy food and sustenance and an apartment, but anything extra goes to his owner. Well, that's okay, but that's pshita. Hadafa pshita. He is a slave, right? So he's owned by another person who owns his work. Well, Mao detain. I might have thought, says the Gemara, that Kivan the chiletle lo yav, right? Listen, it might be that there's a relationship here that if the slave does not work hard enough, right, to make enough money, and he's starving, the owner does not have to give him food, right, because he's in the Ir Miklat, he's on his own. So if I didn't have me as the owner didn't have to provide for him in a case where he was desperate, maybe the parallelism is that if he does make money, I have nothing to do with it. So maybe our financial relationship is severed. Kamash Blan, that's not the case. That in fact, the Eved in the Ir Miklat eats his own food, and anything extra goes back to his owner. What does that do with an Ir Miklat? You could say the same thing about an Eved who runs away to Greece, right? There's nothing about what's special about an Ir Miklat. Maishna la'arei Miklat. Why did you say a case specifically of an Eved who went to an Ir Miklat? Now, of course, there's other answers because it's also a challenge for the Eved to leave the Ir Miklat because he might get killed, right? But says the Gemara this answer, because I might have thought, if you recall, the Torah says that Vinas Shama, right, you run away there to one of the Arei Miklat, V'chai, and you live there. So you might have thought that there's actually an affirmative commandment, a positive commandment to help an Eved or help anyone, not just an Eved, but anyone who runs to an Ir Miklat to survive. Right, because the quote it says v'chai, so therefore avid lechiyuta tfei. Maybe the Torah is specifically saying that not just a slave, but anyone who runs away to an Ir Miklat has to be supported. Kamashmalan, that's not the case. Chai means literally they live because they're not killed by the Goel Hadam, and the owner has no special responsibility to provide for that slave. And the slave works and keeps his own money for his own food, and anything extra goes back to his owner. I'll ask the Gemara, that's the first part of the Braita. But the second part of the Braita does the parallel between an Eved who runs away to an Ir Miklat and a wife who runs away to an Ir Miklat. I mean, the Tani Seifa, right? The second part of this Braita says, quote now, we're on the first wide line, Aval Isha Shegota La'ari Miklat, a woman who kills someone by mistake, and she's got to run away to an Ir Miklat, her husband, Ba'alaz Chayav Mizonoteh. Her husband still has to give her mizonot, even though she's not living with him. She's not doing what she normally would have been in part of his family because she's stuck in the city. He still has to sustain her. Says the Gemara, must be, right? It must be Michlal Delo Amarla. It must be talking about a case where he didn't say to her, right, that I want you to earn money and spend your own money. Because Di'i Amarla, as if he said to her, get a job, earn money, and support yourself, then if he said that, Ba'ala my chayav. Why is he chayav? So you said that was the case for the slave, but what's the parallelism for the wife? So umi the seifa de lo amarla. Now, if the seifa about a wife is where he didn't say to her, earn money and pay for your own bills, reisha nami de lo amarle. The reisha should be where he didn't say that to the slave. So how can you justify explaining the first part of the Braita, where the owner said to his slave in the Ir Miklat, earn money and pay for yourself? That's not the case with the wife. Says the Gemara, no, that's wrong, because it is the Amarle. Lolam da Amarle. The husband said to his wife, who had to run away to an Ir Miklat, look, you're in Ir Miklat, get a job, do whatever you can do and earn money. And why does the Braita say the husband has to support her? Because she didn't make enough money. Isha b'delo safka. She didn't make enough money. So therefore, he's got to supplement it. Because although he can say to her, I want you to earn your own money, if she doesn't, he's got to feed her. So that's okay, that's interesting. But what about the next words, right? The next words in the Braita are the Hami Diktani Seifa. This is again the second part of the Braita. The next part about the woman, about a wife, says, Vim Amarla. If a husband says to his wife who ran away to a Ir Miklat, Rashai. He said to her, earn money from your pay for your bills from your own income, then he's allowed to say that and he's absolved. So it must be that the earlier part is where he didn't say it to her. Now it says it's not. You have to read it as one case. He says to her, I want you to earn money from your own, so provide for yourself from your own earnings. Says the Braita, he still has to provide for her if she doesn't make enough money. But now the second part of the Braita says, the im mispeket, if she makes enough money to support herself, and he had said to her, Vamarlan, he had already said to her, he had said to her, I want you to, use your own money for your income, then Rashai, then he doesn't have to pay her anything. So basically the Braita is saying two clauses. By a slave, essentially, you can say to the slave, you're on your own. And if you make extra money, send it back home, right? But if you don't make enough, it's not my responsibility. You've got to earn enough to provide for yourself. By a wife, you can't say that. You can say to her, I want you to earn enough and I want you to provide for yourself. But if you don't, the husband has to provide for her. However, if he says to her, use your own money, and she makes enough money, then he doesn't have to provide anything because she is totally independent. Says the Gemara, well, okay, that seems to be obvious, right? If it's misapeket, then ma'ila meimra. What's the chiddush? Why would you have to add that if a woman can earn her own money, a wife can earn her own money, that a husband doesn't have to send her money? Because mao detema, I might have thought that a husband, remember, she's not living at home anymore. She's not in her regular village. She had to run away to the big city, right? Because she killed someone, very independent woman. So she had to run away to the big city. And you might think, that we have this principle, I would say, that it's not easy, maybe I would say, for a woman to go out, especially if it's not in her comfort zone, right? It's not in her city. So maybe he wouldn't be allowed to force her, this is how we understand it, to force her to get a job, because it's inappropriate for her to be forced in an unfriendly city where she doesn't know anybody to go out and earn money. Kamashmana, that's not true. We don't say that. That in fact, within reason, of course, she has to go and earn money and provide for herself. And if she doesn't, then the husband's got to support her. Maybe this question about whether an owner can say to his slave, right? I take it back. work for me, but find your own food, right? You got to support yourself and you got to work and give me all your money, right? So lema kitanai. Maybe that is a machloket tanam based on the following right. What does the right to say? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Yachol ha'eved lomer l'rabo b'shnei batzoret. Right? Let's say you have a year of famine. Everybody is really starving, even the rich, even the ones who own slaves. And the Eved comes to his owner and says, look, I can't find food. It's a terribly, difficult year. There's tremendous inflation. Patzor does not mean inflation, it means famine, right? There's tremendous lack of food. Oh, parnaseni, either give me, money every day so I can buy food. Oh, hotziani lecherut, or let me go free, right? I can't remain a slave under you because I can't support myself. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says he can say that, right? Which implies that the owner can't say to him, tough, work for me and I'm not feeding you. But he can say to him, either feed me or send me to freedom. But I'm not going to work for you if you don't feed me. And Chachamim Omrim, Harashut Biyad Rabbo, that the owner's allowed to say, whatever, I don't have to feed you if I don't want to. You're still my Eved. Now, my lab l'hakamiflagi. Mar Savar, that the Tanakama Reb Shimon Gamliel says, Yachol, that an owner can say, Asei imi ve'eni zancha, work for me, but I don't have to feed you. I don't have to feed you completely. And the Chachamim Mar Savar inu Yachol. Says the Gemara, 1 second. It's his bara. That's no way you can understand the Braita to be this machloket, because the words wouldn't say, O parnaseni, O hotziani lecherut. The dichotomy would not be either feed me or send me to freedom. The dichotomy would be, O parnaseni, o teini masei yadai, right? Parnasati. Either feed me or let me keep my earnings. Well, what is he talking about? Freedom. Freedom should have nothing to do with this. According to the Rishim ben Gamliel, if you're saying that you can't say to an Eved, work for me and I won't feed you. So then the option is either work for me and I'll feed you, or work for me and keep your own money, right? So don't work for me, work for yourself. But what does freedom have to do with anything, right? The ode, what does that have to do with famine, right? According to you, an Eved can walk up to his master any Monday morning and say, either give me my money or give me enough food to eat. This is a very unique case. And the case here is the Amar lo where the owner said to his slave, look, I'm not going to feed you. Take money from your earnings every week and you buy your own food. I trust you. You're on your own meal plan, right? Take the money, again, that you earn for me. Keep whatever you need in order to eat. However, it's a shnei batzoret, lo sapik. But the problem is that it's a famine. And so even though the Eved is working all day long, either food is very expensive, there's not enough food, he's not able to make enough money to feed himself. So now he's really stuck. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says he can come to his owner and say, look, either give me money, give me food every day, oh parnaseni, oh hitziani lecherut. Now, how's it going to help you to go free, right? If he can't, as a free man, he's going to work and he's not going to make enough money either. But the reason it would help him to be free is ki hecha dechazi le'inish u'marachlim alai. I need to rely on charity, right? It's a famine. So as a slave, nobody's giving charity to a slave because they assume I'm owned by someone. I'm someone else's responsibility. But if you freed me and I was a free man, I would go sit outside, the gates, and people would have compassion on me. And so basically the slave can say to his owner, I desperately need to eat. You're not giving me food. You're expecting me to earn my own food, but I just can't earn it. But if I was free, people would give me charity. And so you need to free me so I can stay alive. And Rabbanan Savri, why would people give more food to a free man than a slave? Man de merachim el b'nei chari, I have enami rachum merachim. Look, if someone is compassionate enough to give their food in a year of famine to a free person, they'll feed a slave as well. You just have to tell them you're starving, go to the soup kitchen, and you're going to get the same food, and therefore the owner does not need to free you, even though it's a shnat batzoret. So nothing to do with this same machloket. Okay, Tashma. Let's try to prove it from the next case. We are 2 lines from the bottom, 3 lines, I guess, from the bottom. The Amar Rav. Rav said the following: Hamakdish yedei avdo. Person gets into a very high, exciting spiritual day, and he says, everything that my Eved makes should go to Hekdesh. Okay? Now the problem, of course, is that the Eved was using some of the things he made to eat. And all of a sudden, every single thing the Eved makes now goes to Hekdesh. So how does he eat? Right? Says the Braita, I'm sorry, Rav, not a Braita, said Rav, Oto ha'eved loveh v'ochel. the oseh uporea. He can't use his earnings. He can go borrow $1,000 from the bank, pay his grocery bills, and then as he works, he can pay back the bank. Now, we're going to see why doesn't his work go straight to hektish, right? So we'll ask that question in a second. But what do you see from Rav's halacha? That owner, shmamina, yachol harav lomer le'eved, aseimi ve'in zancha, right? Because basically, the master said to his slave, everything you earn goes to hektish, and I'm not feeding you. So you see, I can both take your work and not provide food. Aseimi, work for me, ve'in zancha, I won't support you. Says we're not necessarily, no. Here, the owner is feeding the Eved. So he's saying everything you earn goes to hektish, and I'm going to give you lunch and breakfast and dinner, right? Says, well, then why is he borrowing money to buy more food? Why is he borrowing money if his owner's giving him food? Loveva ochel. Says the Gemara on the top of daf Yud Bet Amud Bet lahadafa, right? His owner's buying him the basics, but some days he wants to go out for get a latte, and that's not covered under the basic plan. So if he needs extra money to get himself something special to go out for ice cream, then he can't use his own money because every penny that he earns goes to hektish automatically. His owner is sending him, healthy meals every day, but nothing for no bonus. And so he can actually borrow money and borrow $5 from his friend. And then as he earns money, he can pay back his friend without it going to hektish. I don't get it. How could he do that? Hektish. Why can't hektish say to him, 1 second, why are you taking money that should really go to us and buying ice cream with it, right? Why can't it say to him, where am I? Hektish, top line, sorry. Ad hashta, up to this point, sagile below adafa, right? You were living, you never made extra money, your owner didn't give you ice cream. How in the world can you request extra food here? Because hektish gufe nichale. In fact, hektish wants him to have all his treats. They want him to be more valuable, to be more strong, to be happier. So hektish is willing to invest in his joy, in his extra food above the bare minimum, because remember, everything he does goes to hektish. So this is investment. It's like when the company provides you, free beer or something, right? So it's an investment. I'm not sure if any company does that, but in theory, right? It's an investment in the worker. So but companies do that. They give you something for satisfaction, right? Because they think it's a proper investment, not because they really appreciate anyone, right? But they think that you're going to work harder and do more. So that's the explanation for this brightness. So basically, the owner said to his slave, "Look, I'm going to feed you, and every penny you make goes to hektish. But if you want a little bit extra, you're on your own. So what you can do is you can borrow money, and because you can't keep the money you earn, you can borrow money, and then as you earn money, you can pay back your loan." Says the Gemara, "Oseu pareya." You can work and pay back your loan, but why can you pay it back to your friend who you borrowed it from? It should go to hektish right away. Kama kaddish, right? Everything goes to hektish first. You can't keep it from hektish. Answers the Gemara, pachot mishaveh pruta. It's talking about where it's pachot mishaveh pruta, where you're earning tiny amounts of money, or as Rashi sort of explains that, it's like a trick, right? Every hundredth of a cent, every basis point, as they put it, right, goes to your friend immediately. It's too small to be noticeable to go to hektish, and therefore you can basically pay them back without it going to hektish. It's a financial scheme to get money back to your friend. And Hachanami Mustafa says, well, in fact, this really actually makes sense, because the Amar Rav said elsewhere a different halacha about your slave. What did Rav say? Hamakdish yad avdo, yidei avdo, or what are we, 6 lines down, right? A person says, the hand of my eved, right, goes to hektish, meaning everything my eved does goes to hektish. Then otoha eved oseh ochel. That eved works, and he in fact can eat the food that he works. It's supposed to go to hektish, but the ilo avda man palachle, because if he's not going to work, who's going to provide for him? And so what you see from Rav is that if you're makdish yad avdo, you still have to pay him money. If the owner says, we'll keep reading, that we're talking about a case where the owner says, I'm going to give you food, right? So remember, Rav said 2 cases. On Amid Aleph, Rav said, if you're makdish the yad of your eved, everything goes to hektish. And in this case, he said, if you're makdish the yad of your eved, he gets to keep enough to eat. How do you reconcile that? It must be that one case is where you say to the Eved, I'm going to feed you, and therefore everything he earns goes to Hektish. And the second case is where you say to the Eved, I'm not going to feed you, and therefore he gets to keep his own money for food, and only the extra goes to Hektish. So you see clearly that that's how Rav holds. Let's read it inside. If you say that the two cases of Rav are hach b'ma'aleh, one case is where the owner feeds him, and yachol, but he doesn't make enough. And ha b'she'eno ma'aleh, and the second case is where the owner's not feeding him, shakir. That's why in the first case, the owner gives him no food and it all goes to Hektish. I'm sorry, the owner gives him food, but all the money goes to Hektish. In the second case, he gets to keep it for his own food. If you're talking about both cases, that or at least the first case, is where the owner is not feeding him. Right? What do you mean if he doesn't work, who's going to feed him? Whoever he wants to work for, he's going to work for, right? So therefore, you see from here conclusively that Rav is of the opinion that an owner cannot withhold food from his Eved. So you cannot say to your Eved, work for me and I'm not going to support you. Either work for me and I'll support you, or work, keep your own money and support yourself. But I can't say work for me and I'm going to keep everything, or I'm going to give it all to Hektish, but I'm not going to give you extra money. And that is a conclusive proof about Rav's opinion. Well, that's great, but unfortunately,
Steinsaltz has a note that in terms of the consecration, only earnings that the slave earns that are less than a pruta can be kept by the slave, which is a really microscopic amount.
But that's why it's borrowing, right? Because you couldn't ever do anything with less than a pruta, but you can borrow from your friend, say, give me $10, and I'm going to give you every penny that comes in, I'll give you back.
It would literally be pennies.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's the end, right? So each penny goes to the friend. That's how Rashi understands.
On the subject of famine, there was a similar situation in the United States starting about 1780. In much of the South, the slave system was no longer profitable. And some slave owners actually freed their slaves, but more often they were sold to other parts of the country where the slave system was still profitable, which is a pretty horrible part of our history.
Right. Well, unfortunately, that's very similar to what the Gemara is talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, continues the Gemara. Well, we're around 15 lines from the top. So Rav clearly holds, Rav's very progressive in this way, and Rav clearly holds that you have to feed your slave, right? So and if you don't, they get to keep their own money that they earn from working. However, we're going to see Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Tashma, the Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and again, it's like 15 or 12 lines down. Hakoteya yad avdo shel chaveiro. Let's say a person, doesn't matter why you do it, mistake, act on purpose, but you, Ruvain, cuts off the hand of the slave of his friend Shimon. So now this is very inconvenient for the slave because he probably wanted his hand, but it's also very inconvenient for Shimon because he wanted his slave's hand. So obviously Rabbi Yochanan is going to worry about that one. Says the Gemara, says the Braita, or the statement, not the Braita. Hakotea yad avdo shel chaveiro notein shifto v'refuato l'rabo. You have to give shevet. Remember, shevet is the time that it's like Shabbat, the time where you can't work, right? So a person is laid up in the hospital for 2 weeks. They would have earned, $1,000 a week. Shevet is the money that you would have earned during that time. Refuato means the doctor bills, right? You got to pay the hospital $10,000. So that money has to be paid by the injurer to the owner of the slave, the rabbo, who then either pays for we'll see what it is. Hold on. It makes it sound like all the money goes to the owner. The otoha eved nizom minat tzedakah. Now that eved, how does he get food? He's not working. He doesn't get fed by his owner. He gets fed by charity. So Shmamino, you see from here, Yachol Rav Lomar LaEved, the owner can say to his slave, Asei v'eni zancha, right? Because that's exactly what's happening. The owner is saying, I'm keeping everything that you would have gotten, meaning I'm keeping the $2,000 that I'm being paid for because you missed 2 weeks of work. But I'm not giving it to you. I want you to go get money from tzedakah. So you're basically giving me your work, which is work by default, and you're not getting fed by me. So you see that from Rabbi Yochanan. That Shmamina Yachol Rav Lomar LaEved Asei v'eni zancha. Not necessarily. He goes, "Hacha b'mayaskin b'maleh lo mizonot." Maybe the owner is actually feeding his slave. So he said, I'm going to keep your earnings for the weeks, but I'm going to feed you. I'm going to send food to you. Yachi amay nizom not tzedakah. So what do you mean? So what do you mean when you say he gets money from tzedakah? If the owner's feeding him, what does he get from tzedakah? That would be lahadafa, the same answer. If the owner provides a basic meal, but the Eved wants a little bit of extra, so there he's got to go to charity. If he needs extra, he needs something special, dessert, he's got to get it from charity. That's why you wouldn't use the verb nizon. The word nizon implies providing sustenance, like the word hazan. You would use the word mitparnes mibayle, like we did before, right? You get support, but you wouldn't use the word nizon. Elav shmamina yachol shmamina. In fact, this is a conclusive proof that Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Rav and says that the owner can say to his slave, look, I'm keeping all your money, find your own way to get food, which of course is easy if the slave can work. So this slave is in the hospital because his hand was cut off, and therefore he's going to starve, and he can only get food from charity. Now, a marmar says
there's a way that the communal authorities could address this if they don't like the fact that the owner is not supporting the slave, and that's they can simply increase the charity assessment for the communal charity fund on the owner.
100%. So
yeah, it's not discussed here, it's discussed elsewhere.
About the communal fund, correct.
Yeah.
A marmar. Now, let's go back and try to understand a little bit about what happened here with this healthcare system. So the statement of Rabbi Yochanan said, Notain shifto the refuato the rabbo. You give the earnings, right? Remember again, he used to make $1,000 a week. You give the $1,000 that you have to pay because you caused him to miss 2 weeks of work. You got to pay that to his owner, and refuato, and you've got to pay the hospital bills to the owner. Says the Gemara, shifto pshita. Obviously, it's obvious to us that you give the money that he would have earned because he's a slave, and that money would have gone to his owner. But refuato it's trichale. The chiddush here is that you give the money that goes to the doctor to the owner. Says Gemara, why would that make any sense, right? You need that money in order to go, not necessarily a doctor, of course, or to pay for his medical costs, right? So that's the chiddush. Why? What's the chiddush, right? Ask the Gemara, shouldn't the money for his refuah go to the slave so he can buy his medicine and pay for his surgery? He needs that money in order to be healed, right? The Sofi means to be healed. Says the Gemara, you're right, he does. But Lotzricha, we're talking about a case. De'amdu l'chamsha yomi, right? They made an assessment that he would need to take medicine for 5 days. He needs 5 days of antibiotics, okay? V'avdile sama harifa v'itzi b'tlata yumi. They went to the guy and he said, you know what? We got another antibiotic that tastes really bad that you could take just for 3 days. So you could save, 40% if you take this poorly tasting medicine. Harifa means poorly tasting, means very strong. So anyways, there's something you can do that would be very strong, but not pleasant, that you would take 3 days. So you might, and it costs less money, right? So instead of paying $500 for the antibiotics, you pay $300 and you get, the old fashioned one that doesn't have the flavor, it doesn't taste like grape, right? So it costs less money. So you might have thought that Ma'adatema Sa'ara Didehu. Look, the person having to eat this disgusting medicine or with strong medicine is the slave. So he should keep the extra money, Kamashmalan, that he gets messed up here too, and that the extra money still goes to his owner. So even though he was the one who had to take the strong medicine and had extra tsar, his owner keeps the extra money that really should have gone for his refuah. That was basically, you use cheaper healthcare system. So you go to the public healthcare system where, they don't have pain medicine, but it's cheaper. So the owner gets to keep that. So unfortunately, the slave keeps losing out. Anyways, continues the Mishnah. We have a few more minutes before 8:30. Let's go back to our Mishnah off this topic now. And recall that our Mishnah had a machloket between the Chachamim and Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was first. About if a person gives a get shichur, which means a document of freedom, to a shliach and says, go give this to my slave. I want to free my slave. And then 30 minutes later, you change your mind. You decide, you know what? I really want to keep the slave. You go back to the messenger and you say, I don't want you to hand it to them. The question is, did it already happen or not? Can you say, as we say as Chachamim say, Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav, that because it's a net positive for the slave, not a net, it's a pure positive for the slave to be free. The second the shliach got the get, the slave is free. Now, that's one interpretation. Rashi makes it sound that way. There's others who say that it doesn't happen right away, but the owner can no longer recall it, right? Meaning the shliach still has to give it to the eved, but the owner has no more say. The eved already took ownership of it. I'm sorry, the shliach already took ownership. Either way, can you go back on that? So the Rabbi Meir said you can go back, and the Chachamim said you can't go back, right? Why did the Chachamim say you can't go back? Because they said slaves want to be free. Rabbi Meir said not necessarily, because a slave would, let's read the Braita now. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Elazar said, Amarnu lo lemeir, we said to Meir, who's the Tanakam in the Mishnah, who says the slave doesn't necessarily want to be free. So we said to Rabbi Meir, why do you say he doesn't go free right away? Why is the get not chal right away? Isn't it a benefit for an eved to go to freedom? Amar lanu, so Rabbi Meir said us, no, not necessarily. It might not be a good thing for a slave to become free. Chofulo, it might be a bad thing for him. Shem haya eved kohen poslo min hatruma. Because let's say he was an eved of a kohen. That meant he could walk to any goren and say, I want your truma. He gets to take it. He gets to whatever his owner gets. He can keep it for himself. And so he had a ready source of food in any city in Israel. And now all of a sudden, he's got to beg with everybody else. So Amrarnulo, so they said back to Rabbi Meir, so what if he can get truma? Hello, ma im yurtze shulazono shulafarnaso rashai. What if the owner said to him, I don't want to give you food. I don't want to support you. I can say that. So freeing you doesn't deprive you of anything. Did I skip a line? No. Yes. No. Amrullo lanu. So Meir said back to him, well, the owner can't necessarily stop his eved from eating truma, right? Because ma ilu eved kohen shabarach. What if he ran away? His owner is not there. Eshet kohen shemarda bala, or a wife of a kohen who rebels and she doesn't, runs away. Hello ochlim b'truma. They can eat truma. V'zeh eino ochel. But now a slave, if you free him, he can no longer eat truma, so it's not a good thing for him. Aval isha, but by a wife, I agree that everyone agrees that it's not a positive for her, an automatic positive for her to get a get, because chofula, it's definitely a negative for her in some ways. Shekin pasla min truma, because not only does she no longer allowed to eat truma if she was the wife of the kohen, but also mafsida min hamizonot. You make her lose her mizonot, and therefore it's a negative for a woman. So the get is not chal the moment the shliach accepts it. And by a slave, you have this machloket between Rabbi Meir, who says it's a bad thing because they no longer get truma, and the Chachamim, who say, well, the owner can just say, I don't want to give it to you. Now, this didn't add anything to the Mishnah, and it remains just as ambiguous, right? So Maikam relay, or Maikam mahadalu. We're obviously missing some of the details here about they seem to be talking past each other, right? Rabbi Meir keeps saying, but then what about truma? And the Chachamim keep saying, they can just free your eved, right? And then they can't eat truma. So what are they saying to each other? Hachikam relay. No. Here is what the conversation really, we're adding the color here. Basically, the Rabbi Meir says to the rabbis, look, hishpetuni al hamizonot. I get it. You answered me on mizonot, meaning it's not a negative for a slave to be freed because then they're not going to get food because the owner doesn't have to give them food anyways. So it's not like they had a guarantee of food when they were a slave and now they lose it. The owner could have said, I'm not giving you food even when they were a slave. He could have said, go earn your own food. And therefore, freeing him doesn't put him in any worse position. But ma tishivuni al hatruma. What are you going to answer me on truma? Because freeing him does put him in a worse position in regards to truma. The chi tamer, now, what are you going to say to me? So what? The owner can always stop his slave from eating truma by freeing him, right? Ibai zarek legito pasale. Remember, a eved does not have to accept this freedom, just like an isha doesn't have to accept the get, right? But that's different halacha. Then eved does not have to accept his freedom. So the owner can just walk over to the eved, throw a get at him in his reshut within 4 amot of him, and say, "You're free now." So it's in my hands as an owner to always do that. Pasale can then no longer eat truma. So, but that's not a good argument, says Rabbi Meir, because the eved might realize, "Oh my gosh, my owner's going to get rid of me," and run away. And if you're a runaway eved, then your owner can't free you, and therefore you remain an eved, but you also can always eat truma, right? So shavak leva arakva azal alma. The eved will leave his master, run away, and go out to the world. So That's what.
He could
That's
eat
what.
truma owned by a different Kohen.
Yeah, no, he can go. He can own truma owned by Yisrael. No, he can go and collect truma in the
From
granot.
anybody.
He can. Yeah, he's a Kohen basically,
Yeah,
right?
wow.
Because he's the property of a Kohen. Yeah, so he can go and collect truma anywhere. So that was Rebbe Meir's answer. And says the Gemara now on top of Daf Yud Gimel. Then they said back, right? This is what Rebbe Meir said. Uma ilu eved Kohen shebarach. Right? Don't you admit to me that if you're the slave of a Kohen and you run away, so you don't live near your owner, right? Or the Eshet Kohen shemarda bala, or a woman who rebelled, meaning she's not living, or she went away, or she's not participating with her husband. Halo ochlim b'truma. They are allowed to continue eating truma even though their relationships have broken down. But this slave, if you free him, he's not a slave anymore. Eino yochol, eino ochel. He's no longer going to be allowed to eat truma. So says the Gemara, wow, Shapir Kamerlu. So that seems like a good argument, Rabbi Meir, against the Chachamim. So it's not a positive to free a slave if he's owned by a Kohen, right? Because you're depriving him of cheap food of Truma, free food of Truma. Amarava, that's true, that is a good answer, but the response of the Chachamim is what we said in our Mishnah, right? What did we say in our Mishnah? Hainu Tukamahadjule b'matniten mipnei shehu kinyano. That the reason that the owner doesn't have to worry about depriving his Eved of Truma is because he owns the Eved, and therefore, what does that mean? He can always deprive his Eved of Truma even without freeing him. How could he do it? He could sell his Eved to his neighbor for 3 cents, right? So if you're really angry at your slave and the slave ran away, and you know that he ran away because he just wants to keep eating Truma, you can easily stop him from doing that by just transferring ownership to anyone who's a Yisrael for $5, right? And so therefore, since you have that ability, basically the slave can never rely on eating truma, because if he doesn't stay in the good graces of his owner, then he can always be possible from eating truma, and running away and saying, you can't find me, won't help him, because the owner can sell him even if he's not there. And so because the owner can sell him and prevent him from eating truma otherwise, the slave basically has no right to truma. And therefore, since he has no right to truma, he has no right to food, there's no loss for him in being freed, and therefore being freed is a schut for him. And that's why the Chachamim say that the second that the agent gets the get, he's free, because zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. We will stop there and pick it up tomorrow with Rebbe Meir. I think I'm doing tomorrow morning as well, and this time works very well for me. Does it work for others? 7:45? Perfect. So tomorrow's Memorial Day, 7:45 a.m. Daf Yud Gimel. Hopefully we'll be back in the same place.
I'm actually probably going to be a few minutes late because here in Lakewood, they daven at 7, and on Mondays and Thursdays, it's difficult to be at 7:45 exact.
Okay, so we'll take you a little late.
Okay.
Have a great day, everyone.
Have a good day.
Dr. Clark.
Thank you. Bye.